Hi everybody. Topic 7 of Unit 1. This is the end of the unit, and hopefully the framework will be set out clearly here about how governments and sporting bingos and IFs and the like act and interact to create this relationship between sports and international affairs. One of the things that really helps secure this relationship is the rhythm of international sport. Now, because I've been doing this a long time, following this for a long, long time, many decades, this makes sense to me. But this is the topic in Unit 1 that sometimes people come back and say, I didn't really get it. If you're like that at the end of this lecture, please send me a note. Call me up. Stop by the office. Let's talk and have it make sense to you. The key is that there are things happening in international sport all the time. And even though the majority of the public only really pays attention to these relationships during the major events of the Olympics and the World Cup, and those frankly get more attention from the countries as well, there are opportunities to pay attention to things all over the world, all the time, almost daily, certainly weekly, around the country. So here we go with the rhythm of international sport. We start here with a picture of one athlete from each of the qualified nations for the FIBA World Cup. I think it's interesting that Global Basketball used to call their tournament the Basketball Championship, but there is some cachet to the World Cup, so lots of other sports have copied soccer and called their championships the World Cup. This is from 2019 because there hasn't been a full tournament since. They are quadrennial, and so even though I'm recording this here in 2022, hasn't been a tournament since. So there are two things I want to emphasize here. So first is qualifying. So qualifying for tournaments last year's by itself. So under the African entry here on the right, so the numbers you see, the 5 spots, 7, 8, 12, that's how many of the 32 spots in the tournament, the finals, you have. So with World Cup basketball, with World Cup soccer, the World Cup qualifying is part of the World Cup, just like the World Cup finals are part of the World Cup. So when we start the Qatar World Cup here in November of 2022, it's actually the World Cup finals, and qualifying for that began almost as soon as the 2018 World Cup finished in Russia 2018. Certainly by early 2019, that's where it was. That article we read back in Unit 1 about Palestine, that's participating in the World Cup. Yes, qualifying, not the finals, but it still is considered the World Cup. So to qualify in Africa, to get to the FIBA Basketball World Cup in 2019, it began in 2016-2017 with 30 teams and worked its way down to 16 in a tournament called AfroBasket. Then they played qualifiers in 2018, and they ended up with 5 spots in the World Cup. Now, so these events, the AfroBasket and those things, they provide an opportunity for politicization because those countries are going to play each other and the tournaments are going to be hosted, and so those provide opportunities. But there's also a lot of political negotiation about how many spots for which region go into a tournament. We'll see an example later in the semester where back in the day, all of Asia and all of Africa shared one spot in soccer's World Cup. And so when you're in a situation where the countries can get together and level a vote, that's not going to stand for long. But that's one reason why when we looked at that structure of the IOC and FIFA, you have a decision-making body that's not always the same as the membership of the states that are participating, so that membership can make decisions that are outside. Otherwise, in a one country, one vote thing, the small states would always dominate the large states. So there's that sort of control. Politicking about sport is a big thing that again, we'll come back to. So in national teams, there's this rhythm that can take 3 years to get to a tournament. A finals tournament, lots of other sub-tournaments, lots of other things happening. The rhythm dictates that happens. Club competitions are like this too. In hockey, there's something called the IIHF, that's the federation, the IF for hockey, called the Continental Cup. That's for club teams, so based in European countries, who go into a tournament at the end of each year. Now, what it means is that in 2021, to 2022, there's a league that plays in each country in Europe that has hockey. Your placement in the league puts you into a tournament in the fall of 2022 to qualify for the final cup in 2023. So here's a team that I chose, not because they're any good or particularly relevant, but because the name's awesome. They're the Hockey Punks from Latvia. And so they won the Latvian league. And so they enter in the preliminary rounds of the Continental Cup. They play teams like Barcelona of Spain, and others. And if whoever wins in their 4-team round robin advances to become the 4th team in the 2nd preliminary round. Who wins goes to the 3rd preliminary round. Who wins to go to the Continental Cup. So these competitions provide ample opportunity. And where this one gets confusing is that there are players from all over the world on the club teams in the countries that come to represent the countries in the cup. Again, we'll come back to that several times, but just like we looked at in that that we'll look at here even later today. So it isn't just team sports either, because international competition by individual athletes in individual sports also can have a lot of bearing on how countries react and act. So this would be oftentimes more how a populace reacts than the government, because these don't come as represented as often as the country, except in this relationship I'll share with you in a minute about how you qualify to represent your country in an Olympics. But in these tournaments, so we'll start in the top right here. This is Elena Rybakina, who is a Kazakh tennis player. She's also a Russian tennis player. So if we look at that, the last conversation about citizenship, questions of nationality and citizenship, she's born in Moscow, Russia. She grows up as a youth player in Russia, and then changes at age 18, 19. She takes Kazakh citizenship. The Kazakhs offered to have her to pay for her training, which the Russians weren't doing. And so for a lot of athletes at that age, if they don't get sponsorship from either a corporate sponsorship, you have to be really famous and well known there for that, or from a national federation, a lot of them would come in tennis and particularly come to play college sports in the United States on a scholarship. So she goes to Kazakhstan. So when she won Wimbledon, which is one of the big 4 tennis tournaments each year, she's an individual competing. She's not on a Kazakh national team, but all of the score bugs and everything else for the tournament have the Kazakh flag next to her name. So when she wins the championship, Kazakhstan, to a certain extent, also wins the championship. Below her is Max Verstappen, who's a Dutch-Belgian Formula One driver. Formula One is the most popular auto racing circuit in the world, particularly in Europe and in South America. So he's Dutch-Belgian. He competes as a Dutchman in these competitions. It's because one of his parents is Dutch, one of his parents is Belgian. And so sort of that question like with Rory McIlroy, where does your citizenship go? What do you want to do? Or with the Boateng brothers. Manny Pacquiao from the Philippines, a boxer, very well-known boxer. There's a wild, to me, clip here as a bonus bit for you to watch that shows the army, the Philippine army, and the rebels they're fighting, declaring a ceasefire to watch one of Manny Pacquiao's championship bouts. They set up a tent in the jungle. They have popcorn. They have beer. They have sodas. They hang out together. They fought the day before. They're going to fight the day after, but they stop to watch Manny Pacquiao. So if you're a government, if you're interested in or nationalism, or you're looking at promoting these ideals, then you can sort of rally around an individual athlete who also then represents the country. So Manny Pacquiao, who then became a senator in the Philippines after he retired, pretty important. And so if you want to emphasize sort of the way that a sport might organize itself around the world, these are championships. So like I said, Wimbledon is one of 4 major championships. The individual sports really change the way things work because you have multiple championships, right? So Wimbledon is one of 4 major championships. The Formula One has a lot of major racing dates. These are global squash events. So U.S. Squash reports into the World Squash Federation. And so they've had their most recent championships held in Europe, in Africa, and in East Asia. And if we went back to some recent ones, they were in Canada. One was in Seattle, Washington. So they are active around the world. So you can see that once you add all the different sports and all the different championships, the opportunities to host, the opportunities to compete, and the opportunities for charged matchups to happen abound. So perhaps, probably, maybe this makes some sense that the tournaments are happening often and all over the place. And that both team sports, national teams, club teams, and individuals all provide these opportunities. So now we're going to look at, though, how the relationship works between the teams and qualifying for tournaments, and how complex each individual sport is going forward. It gets a little messy, so I don't need you to remember everything that's on these next slides, or like everything that was just on the squash side. It's complicated and there's a lot going on, I guess, is the message. But so look at this. So here's soccer in the United States. So when you have the U.S. Soccer Federation, so that's the federation that sits under the IF. FIFA's the IF, U.S. Soccer Federation. What do they actually govern in the United States? What does that look like? And so that federation has responsibility in all these different ways. So if you look at the main ones, you would just look at that parentheses up there at the top. So we think of the U.S. Soccer Federation as something that runs the national teams. And it does, but it's also responsible for the professional leagues, men's and women's, for adult soccer in general. So that's just someone like me registering for a tournament. We had a tournament this weekend called the Harvest Cup, run by the Eastern Washington Surf Club, which is affiliated to the Surf Club in Southern California, which is part of the U.S. Club Soccer and U.S. Youth Soccer Associations, and there we are as an adult team playing in that, all under, at some level, the USSF auspices. There are the NC2A and collegiate organizations that have interest. There's futsal, which is a different variety of soccer, as indoor is, as beach is, as power soccer is, which is in wheelchairs. There's specific divisions for the armed forces, for amputees, for deaf, for Special Olympics, and different kinds of development, different levels of teams. And oh my, once you start to say this, now you're like, okay, so we would presume that the most competition and the most so internally, all these representatives really matter. The state association can be very powerful in the great scheme of things in the U.S. soccer structure. But politically speaking, the U.S. government or people who want to express nationalism tend to rally around the main sports, right? The main teams, the national teams. It's not exclusive to that. But so the USSF then has to have different relationships also. So the USSF is the National Sporting Federation in the USA. It's related to both the NOC, the U.S. Olympic Committee, and then to CONCACAF, the sub-regional IF for soccer. The USOC, so if you want to get into the Olympics, where you have to have a relationship with both. It can't just be a soccer thing, it has to be a NOC. So this is how the U.S. is affiliated, and if we track it through the U.S. women's national team. So the U.S. women's national team is part of the U.S. Soccer Federation, which to get into the Olympics has to go through the U.S. Olympic Committee, which organizes and sends all of its athletes, and then goes to the Olympics. But the actual spot are granted through FIFA and CONCACAF in relation to the IOC. So you're talking about a relationship through the bingos and the IFs that's multifaceted and sometimes in parallel. So if you want to be part of the Olympics, the U.S. Women's National Team and the USSF have to work with the NOCs and the IFs to get into the Olympics. Club teams have to do this too, and I'm going to use Liga MX. This is the Mexican League example of getting into the Club World Cup. Now, just the most recent iteration of this, the Seattle Sounders won the regional club championship, and we could follow this through for them, but they haven't gone to the final competition yet. So we're going to stick with the Rayados of Monterrey. Monterrey's a very successful club team in Mexico, the Liga MX. That's the league in Mexico, the soccer league. So the club team and its league go work with their national federation, the Mexican Football Federation. And they go to a competition held regionally in CONCACAF to qualify for a competition held by FIFA. And what it means is that as Monterrey passes through the system, which they've done 5 times, including one year they beat my favorite team, Real Salt Lake, in a final game. Then they get to go play against Liverpool in the Club World Cup. That's a pretty exciting thing. So what does it all mean? It means there's a rhythm. It's always happening, and we have to pay attention to these different opportunities. You don't need to know the specifics, just that there is a rhythm